Pirate Saves America by Dennis Daly. Hello, this is Jimmy Weldon. Many of you who have heard me speak before know that I love to be a storyteller. The great Orson Welles was once asked whether he wanted to be remembered as a stage producer, a radio actor, movie star, or what? His answer was, remember me as a storyteller. I love to tell the story of Old Glory. I like to think that a lot of young people have been fascinated by the story I tell about that huge flag that flew above the ramparts of Fort McHenry in the harbor of Baltimore in the closing weeks of the War of 1812. The story of that flag and the men and women who died keeping it flying is one of extreme American patriotism. The poem that the young lawyer Francis Scott Key wrote about seeing that flag fly, still waving in the morning breeze, became our national anthem. Long before people sang it, Key's poem had become a kind of early American bestseller. Everyone knew it. People would recite it over and over again. Then, one night, a group of young Americans sitting at one side in a tavern heard some British immigrants across the room singing an English drinking song. The funny thing about the song was that its rhythm, its meter, exactly matched the word pattern of Key's poem. They began singing Key's poem in that old, irreverent British song, and the musical version of the Star-Spangled Banner was born. What an irony! How a poem about the persistent patriotism of the people of Fort McHenry, holding up a tattered but triumphant stars and stripes, should be sung to the melody of a song that came from England, the country whose navy could not bring down that flag. After the overnight unsuccessful bombardment of Fort McHenry by the British, the admiral of the fleet, who had promised to bomb the fort into dust, saw Old Glory was still flying high. It appears that the hopes and blood of fired-up Americans holding that flag aloft, leaning their wounded and soon-to-die bodies against the flagpole, were stronger than the bombs and shells of the most powerful navy in the world. But you see, we had something the British didn't. We had a burning fire to preserve the freedom we had won years before. Those loyal British sailors were fighting for their empire. We were fighting for our liberty. And the symbol of that liberty was still waving in the morning breeze, painting the story of our freedoms on the morning air. The fleet's loss at Fort McHenry was a bitter pill for the British Navy. Admiral Alexander Cochrane took his fleet out of the harbor with the tide. Unable to defeat the Americans at Baltimore, Cochrane and his ships sailed south along the coast, then around Florida and headed for Louisiana. Along the coast, Cochrane's humiliated fleet did win a small victory, but Cochrane was anxious to move on to New Orleans. His forces were to support the contingent of British troops already standing by. If Cochrane could help the British Army take the port at New Orleans, America's southern gateway would be closed. Maybe he could do at New Orleans what he had failed to do at Baltimore. The news of the coming of the British fleet was the big buzz in the bayous of southern Louisiana, and no one was more upset in hearing the news than a French-Canadian leader of men named Jean Lafitte. Lafitte was an organizer, a scoundrel, but most importantly, he was a pirate. Jean Lafitte and his men were making runs into the Caribbean attacking any ship they could, killing or wounding the crews, and making off with the treasures on board. Lafitte loved the bayous of Louisiana and knew them like the back of his hand. He and his ships would sail out of the Caribbean and disappear into the swamps. After sorting out the loot, the best of the goods were taken by a small boat to the docks at New Orleans. They were put into wagons and taken to a warehouse for sale. The arrangement was very cozy. The man who owned the warehouse, a man whom the public thought was just your average honest man, was Jean Lafitte's brother, Pierre. A large area south of New Orleans was the home to Lafitte and his pack of pirates. The area is called Barataria. When Lafitte heard about British fleet coming, he was worried. The American forces left Lafitte alone while he plundered the Caribbean, but the British might be harsher on Lafitte and his men. The future of Barataria was in jeopardy. Lafitte didn't want any military presence in the area. And remember, Lafitte was a French Canadian. He wanted nothing to do with the British. The British had burned Washington, tried to take Baltimore, and now were about to attack the Americans in New Orleans. If they could be successful there, they might win the War of 1812 and take back the colonies they had lost in the Revolutionary War. But it was at New Orleans the spirit of the new nation would emerge as the real winner. The leader of the American forces at New Orleans was Andrew Jackson. We know now that he would defeat the British and eventually use his status as a war hero to become president. What we forget, and what most students of American history are never told, is that Jackson almost lost the Battle of New Orleans. He was facing the same kind of expected destruction they had faced at Baltimore. It was a foregone conclusion that Jackson's American flag would not be flying after the final battle. Andy Jackson, the mountain man from Tennessee, was not about to let that happen. But Jackson faced a dilemma, a shortage of manpower. Now, although he was a master of the Tennessee mountains, he knew nothing about the swamps and bayous of Louisiana. He needed men who knew the area and hated the British. Today, we would call it a no-brainer. But then, it was the answer to an American prayer. Jackson called for Lafitte. At first, the king of the pirates was skeptical of Jackson. Lafitte would be happy to fight the British, but he and his men were already in hot water with the Americans. They were criminals. They were pirates. As a matter of fact, just weeks earlier, Lafitte had met with a British officer. The pirates were given the chance to fight on the side of the British. Jackson heard about the meeting and acted quickly. He would offer Lafitte and his men amnesty. He would offer them the chance to clear their slates if, and this is a big if they agreed to become good Americans and fight for the Stars and Stripes. Lafitte was under the gun. The U.S. civil leader in Louisiana had already called for his arrest, and his brother was already in jail. Which way should he go? Lafitte and his men were not about to abandon their bases in Barataria, but they could not remain neutral. So, in what is now regarded as another magic moment in American history, the pirate king Jean Lafitte teamed up with the mountain man Andy Jackson to battle the British in what became the final battle of the War of 1812. Lafitte told his men they would be fighting under a new flag. So the Jolly Roger came down and was replaced with the Stars and Stripes. They joined the ranks of the Americans. Some went aboard U.S. ships. Imagine pirates boarding American vessels, not to pillage and plunder, but to instruct the captains how to navigate the dangerous waters of the Louisiana bayous. With the help of Lafitte and his men, Andy Jackson prevailed. The War of 1812 effectively came to an end. Just think, America using a combination of military men and newly obtained forces, an international group of pirates who brought their know-how from all over the world, defeated the British in a battle that once and for all showed England that America and the Stars and Stripes were here to stay. But wait, this is not the end of the story. The Battle of New Orleans was an unnecessary fight. What? Yes. You see, Washington and London had already signed a treaty that ended the war. A treaty signed 2 months after the battle at Fort McHenry. Remember, this was a long time ago, friends. Word had never gotten to New Orleans that the war was over. Men fought and died to win a war that had already been won. Now, had Jackson and Lafitte and Cochrane known the treaty had already been signed, Lafitte's men would not have joined the United States, and the battle that put the nail on the coffin for Britain would never have taken place. There's a moral here. Right is worth fighting for. Right is worth dying for, even if the battle is fought after the treaty is signed. The hero here is not Andy Jackson. It certainly was not Jean Lafitte. Let's just say, once a pirate, always a pirate. The hero here was the Stars and Stripes. It's a matter of allegiance. Just as the men from Barataria took down their pirate flag and hoisted up Old Glory, so have the countless millions who came to these shores, traded the symbols of their mother country, and began saluting the American flag. We must all rally around something. Our symbol is red, white, and blue. It flew over the fort at Baltimore, and despite being tattered and torn, it was still triumphantly standing there when morning came. I leave you with one thought. The young people of today crave leadership. They crave a symbol. Will they go abroad to join a foreign cause because they want to be accepted? Will they find some splinter group in the dark recesses of the Internet and join a group of sick minds because they feel at home there? Will they immerse themselves in propaganda and automatic rifles and plan a day of killing at a school or mosque or shopping center because they feel it's the only way for the world to know who they are? It grieves me to think that the manner they need to carry is already within reach. It's there in their classroom. At least, I hope it is. It longs to be held aloft and sung to. But why should any young American reach out and take up the flag of their fathers when they don't know what the symbol means? When someone belts out our national anthem at a sporting event as if it were a personal recital for themselves and not a loving hymn to a grand and glorious symbol of freedom, it teaches America's youth nothing. If the story could be told, if the men and women who lived in the time of the Revolutionary War could be as real to them as today's rock stars, if the story of the tattered but triumphant flag of Fort McHenry could be so understood that young people would love to retell that story, if the heritage of America, the suffering of the Founding Fathers, the efforts of our men and women in uniform, if the courage of our astronauts, the convictions of the leaders who brought America to where it is today, If all of these things could be understood, America's young people wouldn't seek another flag. The flag of Baltimore, New Orleans, Iwo Jima, the flag planted on the moon would be enough. If only the story of America could be taught as the wonderful story it is, and not as a recitation of dates and names from a dusty book, this would be a vastly different America. What a story we have to tell. It's a shame we've forgotten how to tell it. This is Jimmy Weldon. I love you. God bless you, and God bless America.